Today's lesson is from Unit 2, Basic Algebra. It's Lesson 1, Writing Expressions. Our first objective is to write one-step algebraic expressions, and our other objective is to write two-step algebraic expressions. And this goes with the standard that tells us that you should know how to write, solve, and or apply a linear equation. So in this case, we're going to be writing a part of a linear equation, but an expression does not have an equal sign. So when you're writing an expression, you're only writing part of the equation, but it's very important because as you read word problems, you will need to turn them into expressions and equations. Okay, so going with our first objective, writing one-step algebraic expressions, you will see things such as this. Write an algebraic expression for each word phrase. For number 1, we're going to find the sum of 6 and x. So finding the sum means that we add, so we do 6 plus x. And that's it. We're not going to write an equal sign because we're only writing an expression, not an equation. Number 2 asks us to find 9 less than a. Now, these are the problems that people often get mixed up. They see that the 9 comes first and they write 9 minus a, but that's not correct. It's 9 less than a. So we're starting with a. We have 9 less than a. So whatever a is, we have to take 9 off of a, and we have a minus 9. Number 3 says the product of 2.1 and a number b. Remember that letters in algebra are called variables, and they do represent some unknown number or numbers. So when we have a number b, it is representing something, but we don't know what it is. The word product tells us that we're going to multiply. So we're going to multiply 2.1 and b. And when we multiply a constant and a variable, we don't need to put any multiplication sign. We just simply write them next to each other, and that means multiplication. Number 4, we have 1/4 of a number y. So we have some number y, we don't know what it is, and we want to find 1/4 of it. Now, 1/4 is a fraction. If we take a fraction of a number, it's the same as multiplying, and that word of often means to multiply. In number 1, it did not. Number 1, we had the word of, and it's just telling us what we're finding the sum of. But often, of does represent multiplication. So 1/4 of a number y, we just simply write 1/4 y. Another way we could write this is y over 4. We're going to take some number y and divide it by 4, and that will give us 1/4 of that number y. Number 5 is a number 4 divided by r. So this one's pretty straightforward. It tells us that we're going to divide. We're going to take the number 4 and we're going to divide it by r. A better way to write this is using the fraction bar, which also means division. 4 divided by r. Okay, the next page is writing word phrases for each algebraic expression. So now we're given the expression and we are going to write a word phrase. There is more than one possible word phrase for each expression, so we'll try to come up with a few different ones. Number 1 is 4x. Remember that when we have a constant and a variable next to it, it means to multiply. So one way that we could say this is we could say simply 4 times x, or we could say 4 times a number x. We could also say the product of 4 and x, or of 4 and some number x. I'm just going to write the product of 4 and x. Number 2, we have 6 minus x. I could write that as simply 6 minus x. Or more commonly, I might say x less than 6. So when it's saying it's less than something, it means we're starting with 6. We're taking x away from it. So it's x less than 6. So if x were 4, we'd be doing 6 minus 4, or 4 less than 6, which would be 2. Okay, number 3, we have the fraction again. So we're going to say that 3/8 is 3 eighths of s. And it would actually be okay if you had written the fraction in there instead of writing it out in words. Or you could also write this one as the product of 3/8 and s. Another way you could write it, which I won't write out here, you could say the product of 3 and s divided by 8. So you could multiply 3 times s and then divide by 8. So there's a number of ways you could say this. Number 4, there are a couple different ways I could write this. I could say d divided by 5. Or remember, the word quotient represents division, so I could also say the quotient of d and 5. And it's important when you write the quotient of two things that you put the first thing first. Let's just go back to number 2 for a second. Number 2, where we had 6 minus x. Another way we could say that would be the difference of 6 and x. The difference of 6 and x. Okay, our second objective is to write two-step algebraic expressions. So for this, we're going to be writing algebraic expressions where we would have to perform more than one step. So number 1 says the sum of 5 and the product of 2 and k. So when we're finding the sum, we have to add at least two things. The two things that we're going to add are 5 and the product of 2 and k. So 5 is just 5. The product of 2 and k we could write as 2k. So we have the sum of 5 and the product of 2 and k. So we're going to add 5 and the product of 2 and k together. Number 2, we have 6 less than the quotient of t and 10. So remember, when we do something less than, we're going to start with what it's less than. So it's less than the quotient of t and 10. Quotient means division, so I'm going to write that out as t over 10, or t divided by 10. I'm going to start with that. So I'm just going to leave it there. T divided by 10, and it's 6 less. So I'm going to take away 6. Number 3, we have half of r plus t doubled. Well, when we take half of r, we can write that as 1/2 times r. We could also write it as r over 2. And then we're going to add t doubled. When we double something, we multiply it by 2. So t doubled would become 2t. Okay, last one. We have the difference of m squared and the product of 5 and g. So we're finding the difference of two things. The two things we're finding the difference of are m squared and the product of 5 and g. So m squared is going to look like this, m squared. The product of 5 and g would look like this, 5g. So the difference of m squared, difference tells us to subtract. So we have m squared minus 5g. Okay, numbers 1 through 3 on this page ask us to go the other way. We're going to write a word phrase for each algebraic expression. So you might want to take a minute and write some word phrases yourself and then come back to check with some of the word phrases that I write. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with some word phrases, and then we'll check back together to see if any of yours match any of mine. Okay, number 1, the first thing I see that we have, I'm going to call it the quotient of f and 3, and then we're going to take away 9. So this is one of those problems where if I'm taking away 9, I could say this is 9 less than, and what is it 9 less than? It's 9 less than this quotient, than the quotient of f and 3. I could also say that this is the quotient of f and 3 minus 9. That would be acceptable. Some people might say f divided by 3 minus 9, and that would also be acceptable. Number 2, over here I just have a 1. Over here I have 7x. So that's a product. So I'm going to say that number 2 is the product of 7 and x, comma, plus 1. Now, the reason I put a comma is because if I just wrote the product of 7 and x plus 1, you might think I meant the product of 7 and x plus 1. You might think that I meant what I just wrote here, and that's not what we had over here. These are two different expressions. So by putting a comma there, I'm saying we would find the product of 7 and x only, then we would add 1. You could also say this by saying the sum of the product of 7 and x and the number 1. Something like that would work as well. But again, it's very important that you kind of know where your commas go. Okay, number 3, we have half of r, and then we're going to take away 5. So I'm going to write this one a little differently than I did number 1. I could write 5 less than half of r, but instead this time I'm going to write the difference between half of r and 5. You could also write half of r minus 5. I'd like to see you extend beyond just saying them the way we would normally say a problem when we see it, and use words such as difference, sum, product, and quotient, not just times, minus, plus, divide, etc. Okay, your assignment. If you are in the honors class, you do not need to do the additional vocabulary support, and I would like you to do option, oops, I just lost my thing there. I'd like you to do, let's try this one more time. I'd like you to do option 2 if you're in the honors class. If you are not in the honors class, I'm going to use a blue color here. If you're not in the honors class, I want you to do the additional vocabulary support worksheet 1. And you should do definitely option 1. However, if you're not in the honors class, but you still want a challenge, you could, instead of doing option 1, you could go ahead and do option 2. So that's up to you. Answers for both will be provided in class. Okay, thanks for watching.